start. So, this week's Torah portion is Parashat Ki Tisa. Most notably, the story of the golden calf. But before we get to that, first, there's a little bit more. First of all, there's a census, which happens like with surprising frequency in the Torah, considering one of the commandments somewhere in the Torah is also don't count the people of Israel. But this is one of them, the census. And there's some more instructions regarding the building of the tabernacle, the anointing oil, the appointment of Bezalel and Oholiav to be the chief architect and artisan to construct the tabernacle and all of that. Then we get the golden calf incident, which is probably fairly familiar to you, but just in case you need a summary of that as well. The people get nervous that Moses is gone so long, and they demand that Aaron build them a golden calf. And he's like he knows it's wrong. There's like a little bit of hemming and hawing and trying to procrastinate with them and whatever, but he builds it. And there it is, the golden calf. God and Moses are very upset. It's one of the many beautiful moments where God and Moses are like a married couple arguing over how to discipline their children. Did you see what your people did at the bottom of the mountain today? Wait till your father gets home, that kind of thing. But Moses wins. God does not destroy all of the people of Israel, but there is some hefty punishment, even if they're not all annihilated. First of all, they all have to drink this concoction that has the melted and ground up pieces of the golden calf in it, which is gross. Then the Levites go and actively murder all of the people that are deemed responsible. It's not really clear how they because at the beginning of the narrative, it's sort of like all the people were involved. And then when the execution happens, they somehow determine who the real instigators were, and those people are killed by the Levites. And then also after that, God sends a plague additionally. So there's still a lot of punishment, but they're not all wiped out. So Moses wins. And similarly, God says, I'm going to send an angel to lead you guys out because I can tell we're going to fight a lot. This is a bit of a toxic relationship, and I love you. So for the good of the Shalom Bai, I'm going to take myself out of the equation. And Moses says, no, don't do that. I need you. So God agrees to continue with the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, and continue to lead the people of Israel. And Moses moves his tent outside the camp to just sort of to set up like an extra holy place, because the people in the camp are so sinful and easily distracted. Having the tent of meeting a little bit ways away from everybody else gives it a sort of sacredness, that they have to go to it when they want to commune with Moses or with God, at least until the tabernacle is completely finished and anointed, and it will sit in the center of the camp. But in the meantime, Moses sets up a bit outside. Then we get one of my favorite parts of the Torah, where Moses sees God's butt and declares the 13 attributes of mercy of God, Moses comes down from the mountain and his face is glowing. So he has to wear a veil for the rest of the I don't know but that for the rest of the time in the wilderness, but for that period where he is constantly going up and down the mountain to receive the like core commandments, every time he's up on the mountain, he receives more, radiance from God. So when he comes back down and he passes the commandments on, he has to wear a veil because the people are freaked out. Yeah, and that's basically it. We get the little bit of the commandments and learning about the pilgrimage festivals, the commandment to destroy all idols, not just their own, but when they enter the Holy Land, to destroy all the idols in their way, and so forth. So that's the parsha. Also, the Haftarah, I don't know, Hebcal called it like the normal Haftarah, but really I think it's the other way around. But like the Haftarah assigned for Ki Tisa is from Kings, where it's not quite destroying the idols, but I think it's a really powerful image of like how to address idolatry. That the story of Elijah challenging Jezebel and Ahab, that like I'll build my altar. You set up to God, you set up your altars to Baal, and we'll call down each of our gods, and whoever's, pyre spontaneously ignites will know that God is real. And just to really drive home the point, he even invites the Baal worshippers to douse his altar in water, in gallons and gallons of water. They didn't use gallons as a unit of measurement, but they talk like 3, whatever the unit is, they really pour the buckets on. And then of course still his altar ignites and the Baal idols don't do anything. So that's a clean connection. The thing I said about normal versus not normal is that also the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, before the beginning of Passover, is Shabbat Parah. So when it's Shabbat Parah, which refers to the red heifer, the Haftarah comes from Ezekiel, which is a less direct line. It talks about the building of the temple and the third temple, the restoration of the people. And it's not a far stretch, the connection of building the temple, building the tabernacle, being forgiven for your sins and coming back from idolatry. Like a lot of that still tracks, but there's not as much explicit mention of the idolatry, or even of the cow, golden or red. And so it's just not, it's not as like clean a connection. But Ki Tisa falls on Shabbat Parah more often than not. It has to do with like the leap years and when there's combined parshas versus not. So I don't know. So the fact that Hebcal was like the normal Haftarah and the special Haftarah, but the special one occurs more frequently, but it's not as intuitive, I guess, a connection. So that's why the other one is the normal one. Anyway, so that's some summaries. Did anybody, is there any place in particular you wanted to start? Any verses that jumped out at you?
Question?
Sure.
Now, you mentioned third temple, and I've either heard or read from time to time, and I'm a little confused because Solomon's temple would be the first temple, correct?
Correct.
The second temple, built, I guess, around 571. That's the second temple. That was destroyed in 70 CE. So wouldn't the third temple be the one that isn't built yet?
Correct.
Like,
Ezekiel's temple is very specifically a not earthly temple. Ezekiel talks about, it's not just about the return. Like he is in exile, so like you could read it as a prophecy for the second temple when they return, but he talks pretty specifically about like the messianic age and the temple, the third temple that will be built when all the world is at peace and the world to come has arrived.
thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Debbie, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you. At the beginning of the portion, when they're talking about the census,
Yes.
and it says that each shall pay the Lord so that no plague will come upon them when they're enrolled. So does that refer back to the thing about no census? So you have to.
Oh, that's a good reading. Yeah. Upon their being enrolled. I would agree with that, yes.
But it also harkens to the plague that does come later.
Right.
So
well,
that was kind of interesting.
Right. And also that toward the end of the Parsha, also, I didn't mention this, but there is the reference to that the firstborn of every family and species is dedicated to God. And there's there's the background noise on your end is a bit distracting.
I'm sorry,
No, that's okay. Toward the end of the Parsha, there's the mention of the firstborn is consecrated to God because of the firstborn, were saved in Egypt from that plague. And then a process is developed, not in this Parsha, but in biblical times. It's an ancient practice of giving money to the temple, of like paying your tithe for your firstborn son. It's called Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the boy, of the son, as like an exchange for not giving the child to the temple. So I feel like I definitely think that the Peshat is as you said, that this is the payment to be counted in an official God-sanctioned way and not break the rule against census. But there's definitely some other through lines about, plagues and counting and giving money and, those connections that, if we were doing Pardes, that would be maybe remez to notice those connections. Yeah, so Joel put in the chat that there's the Rashi references this to when David takes a census, a plague comes upon them. Although David is also commanded to take that census, and then he does it, and then he's punished, and he's like, but maybe because he didn't collect the tithe first. Yeah. Okay. Other questions, other parts you wanna get to? Dave Gilbert says, my translation by Rabbi Hertz relates this as a counting of men as warriors. Oh, that's interesting. So yes, the census is almost always exclusively men between whatever 18 and 40. Like the point of the census is not actually to count the entirety of the people, it's to count their fighting force. Every time the census, at least in the Torah, I think in David's census too, but I could be wrong. So that is for sure true. And so this reading that Rabbi Hertz relates, so that they have to contribute this half shekel to atone for any people they may have to kill in battle. That's interesting as a preemptive atonement. Although a half shekel for killing someone is, not a whole lot, but okay, I'll take it. Brandy, you had your hand up.
Well, what David just mentioned, it got me thinking, but that's interesting that, so were women allowed to be counted?
No.
If that's,
I mean, not like they weren't allowed, but they just weren't
the
counted.
Draft.
Yes.
Like counting people for the draft.
Right.
Okay. But the reason I raised my hand is because I was drawn to the section that talks about when Moses rewrote the tablets after they broke. And it says he says he wrote the tablets like the first one. That's the translation. But because I was learning about the letter Bet recently, and like the two-ness and the connectedness, and I don't know exactly which Hebrew letters like convey that part of the translation, but what struck me is that it says like the first that God wrote, like the first, and not exactly. And I was wondering if there's anything more to that.
Are you on the first verse of chapter 34 or?
Yeah,
okay.
34, verse 4.
Verse
chapter
4.
34.
Okay. It just, yeah, I mean, the letter kaf is there, that it literally just means like, as in, same as. So, karishonim. I think just that he did it the same way again. I'm sure we could read in some midrash if you wanted, but nothing emerges immediately.
Yeah, but the Hebrew allows for, like, if they wanted to say like he made an exact replica, they could have said that, right? But they didn't. They said that it's like the one that God made.
Well, I think it's more it's not the likeness is not necessarily between the first and the second. It's that Moses's process was the same, that he still sat on the mountain with God, that he didn't like rewrite it from memory. I that's what I read here.
Okay. And then the other thing I was drawn to was in chapter 33, verse 4 and 5. God refers to the Israelites, or I think that's the group of people at the time, yeah, as stiff-necked people.
Yeah.
And this hurt everybody's feelings. And I was wondering if anyone has any information about what that's really getting at. The best I could come up with is that it's like, you know, like we're humans, like we have a skeleton, like we're stiff-necked. I don't know what else could have been meant.
I think stiff-necked means stubborn.
Yeah.
I think. Rather than the physical skeleton, I think it just means, boy, you're stubborn. No matter how many times I tell you not to do this, you do it anyway. But I didn't catch, you said something about he hurt people's feelings. I didn't see that.
Yeah, it says that the people mourned after they were called stiff necks.
Oh, I thought they were feeling guilty, or
yeah, I think they were trying to atone, and that it was less about being called stiff-necked and more that God wasn't going to sit in their midst anymore. Although that struck me in these same verses is these references to their finery, which I don't know why they have finery. They were slaves. They stole some stuff from the from the Egyptians on their way out. But then they were supposed to give it to the building of the tabernacle, right? All of the crimson and indigo yarns and their gold and silver and their tahash skins. So what finery are they taking off to put on their mourning clothes? So I'm not really sure, but anyway.
I had the same question about all the gold earrings that they gave for the golden calf, but finery even more so. How do you walk through the desert wearing finery? You can wear earrings, but I don't know how you could wear too much finery. But I guess when they were celebrating the calf, they were all dressed up in whatever they could dress up, but maybe they took it off and didn't put it on again.
That's possible. Like costumage, like carnival or something, you know.
More clothing references like last week.
Yeah. Lots of clothing references. I just to one last thing. I see your hand, Joel, and there's a comment from Lamar in the chat on the stiff-necked people. I think the connection between Brandy trying to read it literally and Debbie's point about it just means stubborn, is that like there's that they can't like look around them to see beyond what's right here, that they're so focused on just surviving, that they can't adapt to this new way of life. And I think there's so much evidence of like how trauma affects people in these sections when the people like, so the thing with the golden calf, for example, it says Moses didn't come down when they thought he would. And something I read suggested that they had miscalculated. But what I always think it's like, he says, I'll be back in 40 days. Does that mean he'll be back on the 40th day or on the 41st day? Like he'll be gone for 40 days or whatever. And so then that 41st day comes and he's not back by the crack of dawn, and they're freaked out because like they've never been free before. They don't know how to live without a leader. And so God, Moses is gone. God's not in their midst talking to them directly, and they're freaked out. So they demand that Aaron take up the mantle and Aaron make them a god and, lead them forward. And it's that kind of like they're frozen in place by their own fear and trauma, that they haven't begun to adapt and be able to like look around them and like look up and see the glory of God and, and these sorts of things. That's what I think is going on. So Lamar asks, what is a stiff-necked people today? What is considered punishment today? Is punishment received in this life cycle or at some judgment period? Was there writing in those days? Well, there was engraving, there was chiseling, right? It says that he writes this on stone tablets. But yes, they had an alphabet of sorts, the cuneiform. And yeah, that's a good question, the punishment and stiff-necked. So in the Torah, there are lots of promises and sometimes deliveries of divine punishment in this life. But then in later parts of Tanakh, as bad people flourish and good people languish, and the entire country is collectively punished for the sins of the leaders and things like this, there comes a need, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, to construct an afterlife in which the wealthy wicked will be punished, even though like we're not seeing it happen now. It'll happen in another time and things like that. But Judaism is largely undecided about that conflict we see between Torah and later parts of the Tanakh. So it's hard to say. But it's certainly in Torah. I mean, these stiff-necked people, then they're punished. The earth swallows them whole, and, God sends a plague and all of these things. Joel, you had your hand up like a while back. Do you? Okay.
Sure. I like very much what Brandy had to say. I like very much what Lamar had to say. Brandy, I do that every hour because our alphabet is kind of a new invention. Before our alphabet, we had a pictographic alphabet. Each letter, now you talked about Kaf. Kaf is the 11th letter, and it's shaped like my cuffed palm. In other words, this really represents what we call Shekinah. Shekinah is the presence of God that really covers us, covers all of us, follows us around and protects us. So each letter you can see and you can extrapolate from that as far as like. It means like. And as, like, whatever. So with Lamar, we have something known as Arba Gaulot, the Four Exiles. And this, of course, is written thousands of years ago, and I just find it to be so true. And we are right now in the exile of Edom. The exile of Esav, meaning Western culture. So that was Western Europe, and now here we are in America. It's still the same. It's kind of Rome, it's kind of European, and eventually in the time of Melech HaMashiach, the King Messiah, we are going to be back in our own land, blah, blah, blah. You know the rest already. So I just love the way the conversation develops. And I love very much the language and how the language developed. And all of the people, we have children, we have grandchildren. It's just like the language. We're like spreading out. We're populating consciousness. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay. Any other section? I mean, any place? Yeah. Debbie, go ahead.
Although now that I've reread it, okay, God warned Moses that the calf was being built, or before Moses saw it.
Right.
And Moses and God have this discussion about whether or not the people should be destroyed, and God sighs and says, okay, I'll leave him be. And then Moses comes down and he gets mad when he sees the calf. I guess when it's not just a description, but he really sees it, he gets mad. Okay. And then I couldn't understand, since he had persuaded God not to do anything, then all of a sudden he tells the Levites that they need to go out and kill the guilty parties. But I missed it the first time I read it, that he said, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, when he gives the instructions. I just thought, well, here he tells God to be good, to be forgiving, and he can't find it in his heart to be forgiving. But I guess, but he blames God for that, whether or not God says it, we're not sure, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I have two thoughts on this. One is that even though we don't see the compromise happen in their conversation about whether or not to destroy all the Israelites, it can be assumed, like it's a pretty more or less Peshat reading, I think, to say God wanted to destroy all of them. Moses said no, but then he actually saw the ridiculousness with his own eyes and concurred, well, at least the guilty parties should be punished, and this is still in line with what God wanted. So thus says the Lord. Another reading is that sometimes Moses just likes to blame God because the other people don't talk to God, and so it's an easy scapegoat. Like in the story of Korah, he asks God to intercede on his behalf. Moses is pretty explicit about like his own anger and frustration at Korah and his request that God assert Moses's dominance. And yet, after the like challenge happens and the earth swallows Korah up, Moses turns around to the rest of the people and is like, look, God, it was God's decision. Okay. I just set up the challenge. It's not my fault. And it's kind of like, well, but is it not though? So I think Moses just sort of likes to pull that card because he can.
And along the same lines, the fact that Aaron doesn't get punished for all the things that Levites get punished for here and there in the Torah don't seem nearly as bad as what Aaron did. But Aaron, there's no consequences to him, not explicit anyway.
Right. Yeah. I think God knows that Aaron has terrible middle child syndrome and like needs some slack. I just have so much sympathy for Aaron. He's just trying so hard to keep everybody happy.
Exactly, yeah.
But Moses is mad at Aaron. I mean, they have a fight a whole bit. Where is that? Oh, yeah. Why? Oh, yeah. No, actually, now that I reread that line, it's not even that angry at Aaron. It's an acknowledgement that Aaron is easily manipulated to try to keep people happy. What did these people do to you that you would do this with them? Is the covenant of God unbreakable? Is there a chance to break the covenant of God? That is a big question. So I would say yes, the covenant of God is breakable in the sense that it, like on some level, every time the Israelites sin and turn away from God, they're at least breaking the like stipulations, right? Covenant is a contract. So maybe they're not canceling out the whole contract, but they're violating the rules of it. And that's kind of the same thing, right? Like if you're not going to respect it, are you really keeping to it? However, and God certainly responds to that strongly and with wrath, but I would say that God is never willing to break the covenant. Every time God punishes the people, even to the most extremes, even with this collective punishment that's so difficult to contend with, like the exiles, or the earth swallowing not only Korah and his band, but all of their families, which then we learn later isn't even totally true. But if that parsha says it is, or like, when these things happen and it's a total break in the relationship for the time being, but God is always very clear that like when you're ready, and not you necessarily, because the people being exiled are never the generation that is also forgiven, but like when the collective people generations on are ready to return, the covenant can always be renewed. There's always the promise of return and forgiveness. So in that sense, I guess it's not really breakable because it can always be brought back. But from the human side of things, the people frequently break the rules within the covenant. Let's see. One drash I read said that Aaron and Hur were left in charge when Moses attended the mountain. Hur refused to make a god, and the people killed him. So Aaron was stalling for time until Moses could return and take charge again. That's a good drash. The weird thing about Hur is that we don't know anything about him. He really only appears once in that scene where they hold up Moses's arms. And because of that, I mean, that seems to be like a place of honor, like of all the people with, Aaron makes sense, it's his brother, but like, and Joshua, I guess, is leading the charge, so he can't be on the other side, even though he would be a reasonable next step. But like, who is Hur? Where does he come from? Why does he hold up the other hand? So then the idea that he is somehow important, but he is killed off quickly, like that wraps that question up pretty tidily. So that's like a point of midrash, right? Is to just be like, well, this is why we don't know anything else about him. So that's good and tidy. Joel says, agreed. The covenant was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our ancestors. Yes, and there are multiple covenants also. Is like, there's the covenant with Noah. And that's where we get like the Noahide movement, the non-Jews that follow the 7, primary commandments that are given before the 10, before Mount Sinai. There's the covenant with Abraham, which includes the promise of the Israelites. There's the covenant with Moses at Mount Sinai. And then there's all these renewal covenants that are not really separate. Everything else after that is like a renewal of the covenant at Mount Sinai. But there are these 2 other like steps up to the big one at Mount Sinai. And are not children loved by parents, even though children are sometimes bad. Misbehaved, I would say. Never bad. Yes, there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of moments specifically, certainly in the rest of Tanakh, there are moments where God is the lone person in charge and sort of wringing his hands about having to punish the people. But especially in Torah, there are so many great moments of Moses and God arguing about the children of Israel as though they were their children. And I don't think Moses ever calls them my people, but God, when God's in a good mood, the people of Israel are God's people. When God's angry, then God says to Moses, look at what your people did, or sometimes these people. And it's just such a fun little, it's such a, personification of God that like doesn't actually match at all my theology, but it's such a funny conception of like this all-powerful, eternal being losing patience with his children and being like, I brought you into this world, I could take you out. So there's definitely a lot of that. Uh, yeah, Dave, go ahead.
Had to unmute. What about, I understand a lot of the don't do this, do that, don't do this or you'll be punished. But for desecrating the Sabbath to be put to death, that seemed a little extreme.
Yeah.
And is that just our modern sensibility, or is there a really deep reason why keeping the Sabbath was, well, first it's fourth commandment right up there with not having any other gods before me, but I wasn't sure that position alone was enough. I can say, yeah, you set up an idol and bow down to worship it, which means essentially you're also planning to buy into that whole worldview where it's okay to sacrifice your kids to that God. I can see, all right, that one you get killed for. But going out shopping on the Sabbath?
Right. Well, so that's part of where like our modern sensibilities obscure it, because not in the sense of like our how we normally would say that like our ethics have changed, but our concepts of what we might do on the Sabbath or like what constitutes as rest has changed because of modern progress in society and everything. So yeah, like it seems to us, in a updated but severe understanding of halakha, we don't go shopping, we don't drive a car, we don't turn on electricity. But the Israelites didn't do any of those things anytime because they were wandering in the desert and they didn't have any of that technology. So it means something different. Like, yeah, do we want to murder or even exile, like excommunicate a member of our community for playing video games or going to the mall on Saturday? Of course not. But for them, it was part of the whole structure of their new way of life, of their week, of their of the worship of God, that 6 days they labored, 6 days they work on things like building the tabernacle, traveling, preparing food for the camp, all of these things. And on the seventh day, that is the one day that all of that stops and they just focus on themselves, their spirituality, and God. And so it's a totally different it's the same idea, but the actions that are available to them and the amount of like actual physical labor that would go into those things on a normal day, like it's totally different than for us now. So that's an example of our modern sensibilities warping how we read text, not because of our more progressive values, but just because the technology has so totally changed what we do day to day versus what we do on Saturdays. Hold on, my earbuds died. Let me switch my... Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Wait, I still can't hear you.
We can.
On. Oh, wait, hold up. There we go. Okay.
You can hear us?
All right. Yes, now I can hear you. Okay.
Here we are.
There you go.
So
Debbie,
the reason I thought it was worth killing Israelites over is that it's something that separates them from the people around them almost as much as not having idols. And
yeah. That's part of it too, right? This is a people coming out of slavery where they certainly didn't have a day off every week. And there are stories of, I don't know that in other cultures that there wasn't a day off, necessarily, but there are midrashim about other times that Jews lived in exile in places that had different calendars that like specifically made Shabbat difficult. Like, I don't love this midrash because I don't like the vilification of Vashti, but there is a midrash that Queen Vashti like deliberately declared that the weeks be 6 days long, so there was never a Shabbat, and all of the Jews in Persia had to just deal with that. So things like that, I mean, also add the significant. I mean, that's obviously much later too, but there is that idea as well. That it's just part of the whole structure. Like, you can't really separate out the weight of the commandment against idols from the weight of the commandment to observe Shabbat.
There's that saying, just like, how does it, just like Jews make Shabbat, Shabbat makes Jews, or something like that.
Yeah, more than Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. Yeah, that's Echad Ha'am. He was a 19th or early 20th century Israeli poet of like the real pioneer age, cultural Zionism. So I guess not Israeli because the country didn't exist, but you get the idea. Let's see, what do we got? Reference: Sabbath is one of Judaism's greatest gifts to humanity. People in the ancient Near East had nothing similar to the Jewish concept of a weekly sacred day. Yeah, and I would say, I mean, this is now we are getting into modern sensibilities and my progressive values here, but I don't think it's an accident that a lot of the early labor movements in this country are thanks to Jews. Like, this concept of we deserve a day off, a day of rest every week is like really integral to our whole worldview. And then I don't know, they just threw in the second day off just for kicks. I didn't, but but yeah, like I think that's very central to Jewish conception of time to have Shabbat. Heschel has, I mean, again, this is much later, and now we're getting into more like Heschel had some sort of like neo-Hasidic, mystical leanings too, but his whole thing about Shabbat is a taste of the world to come. It's like 1/10 of paradise or whatever. And so it's not just about not working, but it's about having a time of complete freedom from the regular distractions of life, and like having an opportunity for your soul to really be refreshed. Hold on, there's one other comment. Is faith or belief in God important in Judaism, or just keeping the tradition alive more essential for the everlasting covenant? Action is always more important in Judaism. Faith is important, and being belief in God is it's one of the commandments, but people say that Judaism is the belief in one or fewer gods. Like, we're definitely monotheistic. You can't have more than one. Well, like, you can be a Jewish atheist. The important thing is what you do, is the tradition. It's the tikkun olam, making the world better, teaching your children, that sort of thing. Debbie, you had a hand up. Did you want to?
This discussion of Shabbat brings to mind Lamar and I had a conversation yesterday, and he was asking about, well, I don't remember exactly how it came up, but the question came up, when did the idea of Shabbat services come up? With temple life, I don't think people could have gone to the temple every week. So when did that start?
It would have been pretty early rabbinic. They did, I mean, yes. So we have the pilgrimage festival specifically because Jews lived all over the country and in sometimes other places in the world, and they needed to come specifically to the temple for the week of Passover, Sukkot. Shavuot's not a whole week, but they probably came for more than the one day, you know, because it was a journey. But beyond that, there were Shabbat specific rituals in the temple. It was still a sacred time for worship for the people who lived in Jerusalem. You know, if you could get to the temple, there were specific rituals happening there, including an extra sacrifice besides the tamids, which is why in a traditional synagogue on Shabbat, there's an extra Amidah in the morning service. It's called Musaf, just like the extra sacrifice was. There's a lot of like direct correlation between the sacrifices and our prayer services, and that includes how it's changed on Shabbat specifically. So it's a very immediate, I mean, it probably was in evolution. There's some overlap in synagogue life and the early synagogues and the end of the temple. So it's probably already in evolution, but certainly as soon as the temple was destroyed and the yeshiva at Yavna was set up, they would have had Shabbat service for the men in the Beit Midrash by the end of the 1st century. Let's see. Joel says, emunah, some say belief. Joel says, quotes Exodus, but Moses' hands were heavy. Okay, this is the Aaron and Hur thing we were just talking about. And I guess, because emunah comes up there as what? As strength, as fortification?
It means to uphold, to make steady. Emunah, it's also the root for the word emet. Emet means truth. So a lot of times we talk about, oh, do you have emunah? I think that's not a good use of the word. It doesn't mean what we're believing. You cannot believe that Moses' hands are going to hold up by themselves. What you can do is you can, through your thought process, you can uphold the faith. You can uphold the Jewish tradition. Number 2 is our Creator, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, has really upheld me these many years. Thank God. Okay, taken me out of a lot of jams, provided food for me, provided everything. What did I do? I'm just here.
But isn't that faith that you believe that it was God and not?
No, there's no word in the Bible that says faith. The only one that comes close is the word bitachon, but that's not it either. Like I was brought up in an environment of Christianity. Probably a lot of us here were. My school friends, whatever. In Christianity, it's very important that you have faith. I think it's everything. For Jewish people, no. You can be an apostate Jew. You can back away from it completely. Guess what? You're still a Jew. You were born a Jew, you will die a Jew. Doesn't matter what you confess, what you profess to believe. No, it's who you are and what you do. It's our heritage.
Right. I don't disagree with that, but that doesn't mean that there isn't also faith. in Judaism or belief. Because you can do all those things, uphold the Jewish religion and tradition and study and not believe that God is getting you out of jams. You can do all those things and still think it's coincidence that things have worked out okay for me. The idea that you do know that it's God's hand, that is faith. Additionally, there is room for faith in Judaism. It's just not the core of Judaism.
Okay, I think a lot of like Maimonides, for example. We talk about the 13 articles of faith, whatever. I'm talking in Torah Judaism, and what we the word just isn't there. I've just read so much of the Hebrew, read so much of it, and if I run across that word and I'm wrong, I'll be sure to tell everyone I know. For example, if I get a little hungry, I eat a piece of bread. I don't have to have faith, because that piece of bread is going to reverse entropy. It's a miracle. The whole universe is increasing in entropy. Here I take this little piece of bread, whatever, and just miraculously, I'm converting it into energy that I need. It's like, it's just how things have been set up. How about time itself? Time moves in a forward direction. It doesn't matter if I believe it or not. No one cares. If I sit around in a study group and half the people there say, oh, how come Jewish people don't believe in God? I don't even hear that. What's the difference? You can say whatever you want. You're here. How'd you get here? Magic? So anyway, that's my Josh unbelief. And as far as prayer, I just put it in the chat. I just found out very recently, prayer is very, very old. It predates the rabbinic tradition by 550 years. And it's right, I gave you the quote for it.
Prayer is in Torah.
On this discussion, I just wanted to share a thought that I've sort of worked out in my mind about how the belief in God and actually going and doing things like is interconnected and related to our discussion about faith in God. So the way that I see this is that if you believe God exists and God is with you, then when you go and do good things, you're probably going to be more successful at doing them, and therefore you don't have to believe in God, but in the long run, in the big picture, you're probably going to have more positive outcomes if you do. So right. It's gonna, eventually people might figure out that it's a good thing and that they're yielding more of the better outcomes when they believe God is with them. I don't know if that helps anyone, but that's my rationale.
That's sort of the core of Reform Judaism, especially in the last 35 years, as we've returned to more traditional ritual, that it's not necessary. We don't find it halachically binding the same way more traditional Jews do, but it so enriches our Jewish values if they are fortified with faith in God, with prayer, with Hebrew, with Shabbat candle lighting, with, these things. Like otherwise, why be Jewish, right? You can just go do good deeds. Anyone can go do good deeds, but but having the rituals that uplift your soul as you do them, makes it more worthwhile. Prevents burnout from how much work there is to do to make the world better. And that is another thing about Shabbat. Prevents burnout. Essential self-care. All right. Last thoughts, questions before we close? Wonderful. Great. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.